Welcome to hashtag 52 Needs, and this week we are talking dignity, a very, very important topic. And I'm very privileged to have with me Susan Staples, who is a natural health healing advocate and who has studied natural healing practices for more than 15 years. Susan experienced a health crisis in a car accident in 2004 that left her with no clear medical path for a cure. Determined to get better, she discovered a path through the ancient healing practices inspired by traditional Chinese medicine and Peruvian shamanism. As a grounded airline pilot, she understands the challenges of today's work demands. She's passionate about sharing these ancient forms in a modern way. And Susan has earned a BS in health education, an MA in spiritual psychology, and she's uniquely qualified as she integrates her learnings as a captain for a major airline, the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, the Institute of Santa Monica, and the Four Winds Light Body School of Energy Medicine. Susan is also certified by the American Association of Drugless Practitioners, and through her online practice, she offers one-on-one coaching sessions they're more than coaching, they're healing sessions that include personal health coaching and energy medicine interventions for living life above the clouds. Welcome, Susan. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Angela. Good to see you.
Susan, so we've talked about respect in the past, but dignity is a whole different thing, isn't it?
It really is. It sometimes is often confused with respect, but for me, I feel like it goes just a little bit deeper.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like if dignity is something that is there, you give respect, you extend respect to somebody because you've got admiration for them. But for me, dignity is something that somebody has or is, nobody can take it away, right?
Unless you give it away.
Yes. But we all have dignity, and the UN Declaration of Human Rights, I love it. I'm going to read this because it's the preamble that says, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and alienable rights of all members of the human family is a foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world.
Beautiful.
So the thing is, we have extended that since then. This was in the 1940s, right? So that we have now given dignity also to species other than human beings. But that's a whole different topic we'll talk about in another video. We're talking about dignity at work right now. So yes. What is dignity at work?
Wow, it really can be based, I think, on the individual experiences. For me, as an airline pilot, as a woman in a male-dominated field, my dignity some days was very challenged. And that's why I said, unless you give it away.
Yeah.
I found myself in those challenging positions as a young woman, not really understanding what dignity might mean, not really having given any real thought to what that might feel like even. And I just went to work. And some of the experiences that I had were very challenging because I was number 41 hired at the airline that I was hired at. And so it was a new experience for the men to start integrating the women into the cockpit. And most of the men were very welcoming. And there were some that were, they had a difficulty with it because it was an environment that was totally new for them. They were used to being with women in a certain way, their mother, their sister, their daughter.
Yeah.
And they didn't know how to quite define what dignity might mean in their own workplace. It was almost like it was taken for granted in some ways. And for me, it meant, how do I show up and express my own dignity in being there and being present and doing my job? So it added a little bit of a different dimension to the work that I had to eventually accept. And one of the things that came out in my healing work that I did after my accident, you know, hindsight's always 50-50 and or 100% actually. And, you know, you have your eyesight that you can really look back. And I started to remember times in the airplane and all the lessons that I learned there about dignity, because it's based on the old principle that your outer experiences of what you experience in life is really a reflection of what we're all working on inside our inner life and what that might mean to us. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, even though we're guaranteed certain inalienable rights of dignity, we still have to have that as an expression. We still have to be mindful of it. And so where it went with me is more on a level of self-worthiness. And where was I showing up maybe with my self-esteem not as high as it could have been, perhaps. Or, you know, I was a young woman. I was 28 when I was hired. So I really didn't have a lot of experience either. You know, kind of a funny, quick story, but I showed up in operations one day and a, you know, tall, gray-haired captain met me, and I was a fairly new co-pilot. And he shook my hand and he was very professional to me. And then he looked at me and he says, I have to apologize. He says, I've never flown with a woman before. And I smiled and I said, neither have I. And we both laughed and realized that we were going to get through this together. So the dignity that then was present. I reached down deep to find whatever that expression might look like for me at that time.
Yeah.
And so it comes back to, how was I choosing to show up? And I was choosing to show up with a sense of humor instead of a chip on my shoulder, because I could have chosen, oh, here's another guy that doesn't get it, right? But I wanted to make it easy. I knew that, of course, he was probably the most honest one of the bunch at the time. You know, he had no experience. Well, neither did I. So that's where we have to reach down deep inside, because we don't have that practice always. And we can't always express ourselves in a way that we want to. So we have to take the time to really look a little bit deeper inside ourselves, or find somebody that can help guide us to find that part inside of ourselves that can be expressed.
Okay. But what if people don't have any interest in awakening or in acknowledging the dignity? Because, like, for example, Amazon is going through these unionizing negotiations at the moment, where people supposedly have to use pee bottles, or in some what I read when I looked at this was also they one warehouse actually offered the Amazon workers adult diapers, so they didn't have to go to the bathroom. Now, for me, that is also a question of dignity. You know, it's like if somebody, and again, you know, sweatshops or where people don't get enough. I mean, this is, you talked about that we need to, people can't take it away, we give it away. But we can keep people in a place where they are willing to give it away, you know, because their basic needs for making minimum income will supersede even, will I be treated with dignity and with respect?
Angela, that reminds me that there's just another universal law out there. And this is so unfortunate, these experiences that you're expressing right now and sharing. It really is something that you don't want to think happens in the world, right? But here's something to consider. And that is that person who is supposed to be maybe the more conscious person, the one that's in the leadership role, the person that is extending a hand, or a job for that matter, they have a duty to provide a work environment that is dignified
Mm.
for that person to provide the service that they're looking for them to provide. You know, I don't know all the backstory of what's going on with Amazon right now. I obviously, you know, I haven't heard both sides of the fence by any means, but I did some union work while I was at my major airline, and it was for women's working environment.
Mm-hmm.
It dealt with women's uniform because it didn't feel very dignified, the one that we originally wore.
Mm.
In fact, I once looked in the mirror and said, my God, I look like I'm dressed up in my dad's old suit. You know, like I was a little girl that just went in and put my father's suit on, you know, the way it fit, because they didn't have women's uniforms then. We would take them and get them nipped and tucked and, you know, try to fit our bodies. And then it wasn't until a little bit later we started to do some more things. So, and for me, that was, and definitely something I had to overcome was, well, you know, I wanted the job and this is what they had at the time. But I was also willing to roll up my sleeves and go volunteer and have my voice heard, and said, I think we can do better than this.
Did you also put your hand up for more, well, I know that for a while, flight attendants, especially female flight attendants, wore mini skirts and really high-heeled shoes, which were, I mean, I can barely walk in high-heeled shoes on flat land. Being on an airplane.
It was the 60s, Angela.
I know, but still.
Yes, no,
but
I agree.
That is also dignity. I mean, you know, wearing clothes that you're comfortable in, working in a work environment that's harassment-free.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
it goes back to self-esteem.
Yeah, but also equal pay. Equal pay is also dignity, isn't it?
It can be expressed that way. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So we're looking here. On one hand, I'm going into the approach I'm taking here at the moment is consciousness has not quite evolved to that level yet. And you're going,
consciousness has. Yeah. It's just we haven't elevated our own consciousness to express it. Yeah. Yes. So it's already there.
That's what I mean.
We have to step into it.
Yeah.
So, and if we don't have a mentor, if we don't have tools, like me, I made every mistake in the book. I fell on my face multiple times saying the wrong thing back, or not always having that cute little best comeback to come back to. I went home in tears many nights, you know, after flights, because I wish that I'd had something that I could have thought to say that would have been better. But on the other hand, you have to be in the game. You have to have the shirt on, you know, the t-shirt on, the jersey on, as they say, so you can be in the game and have your voice heard. And I was willing to put up with women. Yes, I'm speaking about women in my case. Yeah. And to get in there and to do some things. And so I'm proud of the work that I did with the women's maternity policy, women's sexual harassment, and also the women's uniform. And that was the early 90s. So there I am in a room full of men, probably 20 men, union men, men from the company, and also the National Mediation Board. And we're talking about the women's maternity policy. And I'm 8.5 months pregnant at the time. And it was really living the policy as it was written, which there really wasn't one. And so I was able to highlight in real time. And that's what I ask women to do, is I say, you know, ladies, it's really not, it's about us stepping out of our victim mentality and moving into a victorious place. And how do we do that? And that's where a lot of the work that I've done and I share is about shedding our old story, letting that go and healing it. And once we heal it, we can no longer experience it. And so I've come full circle now. So even though I'm now 15 years into my long-term, I guess you could call it, disability. I have some neurological things that haven't been cured yet. And so I'm still not able to hold a medical certificate. But here's the beauty of this whole thing for me, and I think that this is a living vision for other women to hold, is that sometime between my accident and not finding the cure, and then finding the healing path, when I left, there wasn't such a thing as Facebook, or there wasn't such a thing as what we're doing now, Zoom. I left, and I had, I literally felt quite abandoned, to be quite honest. It's like nobody called from work. There was no work. I felt pretty much on my own. And so, other than some friends and family. So there I was. But now that I've been able to reconnect the last couple of years with colleagues and friends through some of the social media and some of the groups, it's really surprising, but it's also really interesting, because the men that I once felt almost afraid of, and that my dignity was challenged with, it's no longer that way. Mm. And it's because I found the dignity inside myself.
Yeah.
And I healed the parts of myself then that have allowed that dignity to come forward. Mm. And so I'm not experiencing that with the men anymore. And when I run across one of the men that may still say something or do something that at one time would have really triggered me, and I would have gone into that victim place, don't have my dignity, right? All I can do is put my hand to my heart and say, that poor man has so many issues and is suffering himself so much that all I can do is say back, I just bless him and for his highest good, and know that he's on his own path.
Yeah.
And so for me, total gratitude of being able to experience then my own mindfulness of not feeling dignified at work at one time, to now saying, yeah, even with all the mistakes and blunders that I made in this area, and putting up with so much heaviness sometimes of not feeling welcome or not being treated in a dignified way.
I mean, I certainly had these experiences as well, but like you, I found that my response really determined how the relationship continued. If somebody made an effort to treat me in such a way that it was undermining my dignity, and there could be all sorts of different ways, negotiating in ways that I felt were not quite the way to go, or making a pass at me, really in environments where I would sit there and go, really? You're seriously doing that here and now? Mm-hmm. And then just making comments back and saying, when somebody says things like, oh, I've always wondered what it would be like to have sex with you, and go, I'm sure your wife would be interested in that as well. Can we get back to the business issue that we're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is what feels unfair is that extra quick things that we have to come up with to say, to put things back into place.
Yeah.
Because we want to be, and that is part of commanding the dignity that you deserve.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we want to be in a place we don't have to. Yeah. We shouldn't have to really.
No. But we don't teach people to speak up. I mean, I know in my work with people, I always say, have you talked to your boss about it? Oh, I couldn't possibly talk to them about it. And I said, what's stopping you? I always, like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? You can go back and say, well, that conversation didn't go so well. Could we give it another go? But if you never open your mouth and you just keep going with whatever expectations are put on your shoulders, nothing's ever going to change. And your self-confidence, your self-esteem, your dignity is going to start to crumble. And you're going to start doing things that are against your ethics and your integrity simply because you don't really want to open your mouth anymore. You've just accepted that that's what it is. And we all have the right to be heard, and we all have the ability to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone
do, but some people are not in a healed enough state to be able to do it, and they need assistance in doing it.
Yeah.
They need to heal to the place that they can.
Yes.
Because if I had gone forward in how I felt at a different airline, before the major airline, I flew for a smaller airline, what we call the pedal jumpers, but I was physically assaulted. So after a day of flying with this guy, I was the co-pilot, and he was just like this on me. Don't hold your pencil with that hand, put it over here. I mean, nitpicking every little thing. And it's not like I hadn't flown with all the other captains. I had and didn't have a problem. It was only him, right? But by the end of the day, it wore on me and wore on me and wore on me. So I was feeling quite bad not being able to please and, being able to do a good job for this captain. So we were parked, and part of the responsibility of the first officer, because it's we didn't have flight attendants, was I had to go into the back and clean the back of the airplane, cross the belts and get it ready for the new passengers while the captain went in and checked the weather, got the flight plan, and helped do the pre-flight, the other parts of the pre-flight planning. And instead, he started to yell and scream at me in the back of the airplane after everyone got out. And then he took me by my necktie and he threw me down in the back of the airplane, and his fist was out, and it was this far from my nose when he restrained himself. And I screamed. Oof. I had some big choices then, because I knew that if I said anything at that moment in time, fair or unfair, I would never work ever, ever again. And everything that because of the way things were at the time, so everything that my family had invested into my flying lessons, everything, and I was just at that part of being able to go into a better job. And of course, the majors was the goal. I had to keep my mouth shut. I did file a report, and then I was told that I was going to be retested. And then several of the captains came and said, don't go to the retesting because it's a setup, because it's a very ambiguous test, and you may not pass it just to get rid of you. Yeah. And then off you go. And I know so many women that this has happened to. So I just politely left, went and got a different job for a temporary period of time, and then got on with the major airline. Mm-hmm. So we have to be strategic also in the way that we don't want to put ourselves down into the gutter where the other person tried to put us. We have to rise above it. We have to come way above it and look at the bigger picture, the bigger map. And we have to pick our battles in a way that that really, they aren't battles anymore. So that there's some ease and grace there, because when I got on with the larger airline, I certainly didn't have any of that to contend with. So and I got on, one of less than 2% of women in the world at the time.
And you did what you could to change that system as well, didn't you?
I did. I rolled up my sleeves. I went in, I volunteered. I had my voice heard. This is the first time I've even told that story publicly. I've told it only a handful of times since it happened way back in the early 80s. And I appreciate where we once were with where we are now.
Because I
Although there's
think these
still a
days
long
you would,
ways to go.
I think these days you would probably have a better opportunity to speak up and actually say, this man, just physically attacked me. And you would not be retested under those conditions, because after #MeToo movement and all of those where women actually have spoken up, I think consciousness has definitely shifted.
We have definitely shifted. We've come a long way in being heard. There's no doubt about it. But it was because of some of the women like myself at the time that were willing to stay in the game so that there was a game to be played.
Yes.
There had to be
revolution from the inside.
There was, there was all the other captains. There was only 60 pilots, 30 co-pilots and 30 captains at this airline. They all knew what happened. And they all knew that this man had a temper, and they all knew the truth. They all knew me. They all, but they couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
And the way things were set up, it was just set up that way. So not that it's okay, because it's not, but in timing, it doesn't have to be immediate. I kept my dignity because I didn't get in the gutter with him.
Yeah. But you didn't stay either. You left.
I did. That wasn't and for me, that wasn't what was the important part. The important part that I did keep my dignity. I left with my head high.
That's what I mean. You didn't get on the plane with this guy again and succumb to the same kind of treatment. No,
I didn't even get in the plane that night with him.
Yeah.
I flew home with somebody else.
That's important. There's a big difference between not reporting somebody and then continuing with that kind and enabling that kind of behavior by not speaking up, or at least leaving and saying this is not okay.
Yes. And the perfect storm, Angela, is when two people get together and they both have low self-esteem. Because in a gender type situation, if the woman has a low self-esteem and the man has a low self-esteem, it's really the worst case scenario. Yeah.
But that's where dignity right from the start comes in. But that's a different conversation.
It is.
So it's really important. I mean, again, as you said, as dignity starts with you. It's really noticing what you allow and what you don't allow. So boundaries will play a major role in what kind of sense of dignity you have about yourself. And and again, it's an ongoing process. We're evolving.
Just like healing is. Healing is a process that never really ends. We just elevate ourselves to a new level.
Yeah. Well, that's the perfect ending. Thank you so much, Susan. This has been a really great conversation and lots of food for thought. And it's not about necessarily, for everybody who's watching, about agreeing with what we've said, but it's about start thinking about what dignity means to you, and how do you know that you've got dignity at work, and what are you doing to make sure that you continue getting it. Yes. And that's really important, because that's the way in which we start evolving into a different world where people are safe. They as diversity and equality, all of these things that we have, that we need in order to make sure that everybody participates to their full potential. So thank you so much, Susan. I look forward to seeing you again soon, and I see everybody else next week.
Thank you, Angela.